This conference will now be recorded.
Did I do that?
No, I think we're good, Adam. I see your presentation is up. Is Lois joined us, Adam?
I was looking for her. I don't see her yet. She called me, Davin, and said she's clicked on the link and it says waiting to be let in.
Before we get started, Brian, do you have any information on that?
There shouldn't be a waiting room on this. I know Les just resent the link to let her in. Yeah, this meeting doesn't have a waiting room though, so I'm not sure what she's seeing.
Okay, well, let's get going and we'll hope she comes in. How about that?
Adam, it's all yours.
All yours. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you, sort of. Can you see the screen, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll just go from here. So it's great to be with you. As Davin said, we were asked by the state to sort of construct a statewide mobility strategy, and he's told you a little bit about us. And so I won't dwell on this, but for context, we spend time working with companies on supply chain issues and strategy and where facilities go. A large part of our work is around airports and seaports and inland ports, and developing those building those projects. But there's a whole segment of our work that's just around mobility, and that's around people and things, cargo and essentially passenger vehicles and trucks, and the equipment that moves cargo. And so we work on policy projects like this one for the state, or strategy projects. We work with a lot of OEMs and technology companies that are working on testing and development and bringing their projects to market. So it's a space we're very involved in. In fact, much of our work really now integrates mobility and the logistics project work. So from the perspective of Lois, you're still not here, right? Okay. We start with a wide perspective. The definition of mobility for us, it's not the automotive industry, and it's not the technology industries. It's really the fusion between the very broad definition of automotive, which is cars and trucks and all sorts of equipment, frankly. It's about how things and people move, as I said, and the automation of that movement and the propulsion systems. So that's generally around the clean energy component of that. And so we sort of framed this in the beginning with, it's really changing many things about our lives, in terms of how people move around, in terms of car ownership. We're working with Ford and a whole host of OEMs. They're not banking on all of us buying cars in the future. They're banking on networks of cars and car sharing and so forth. It's all about the automation that makes cars more flexible and makes essentially transportation more flexible. Cars are just a part of that. And they're banking on some fundamental changes in their industry, not only the technology and the equipment, but how we own that equipment and use that equipment. In terms of the propulsion systems, GM just announced in the last week that they're not going to make internal combustion engines in not too many years, 15 years or so. So it's not a matter of will Tesla and others sort of be successful. It's really a matter of how quickly the changeover will occur to clean energy propulsion systems. The industry would call that powertrain. Thanks, Brian, for sending that on. In fact, some of that now is about hydrogen, and that's particularly about heavy vehicles, heavy trucks, buses, and so forth. Transit and how folks move around, it's a big part of the industry, and we're pretty sure that between the car ownership change and the transit changeover, we'll be traveling in our urban settings very differently than we do today. And then, as from a city planning perspective and an urban planning perspective, how we plan for car parking, land use plans, the infrastructure strategies in states and in cities. much of that is going to change, and I would say most communities really don't understand that quite yet, because no one really does. But the need for vehicles, the need for roadways will change. Highway capacity planning will change because we'll need actually fewer lane miles. We will need fewer lanes because automated cars will effectively move more efficiently and won't need as much capacity on the road. That's the big picture. And on the cargo side, everything's changing, from what's happening inside the warehouse to what's happening between the warehouse and the yard around the warehouse, how cargo is moving between cities, how cargo is moving off of vessels onto the train. It's all becoming automated at various pace, at various levels. But truck autonomy is a real thing. There are trucks moving on the road today in a test environment, and also in a real world environment where we're working with companies that are moving cargo for Walmart and Amazon autonomously on the public road in various states. In fact, we just finalized a project with Daimler Trucks. They're putting an engineering complex in New Mexico. This one in Albuquerque, because they're testing on the I-10 corridor. I'm sorry, the I-40 corridor. And so as they test their autonomous trucks from city to city, they need engineering complexes every so often. And so we see much more of that happening, and trucks operating autonomously on their own, in the next several years, starting to anyway. From an industrial district perspective, we think that in the industrial park, at least the modern ones, will be automated. Cargo moving, let's say from an intermodal facility to a warehouse, or between warehouses, and so forth. So all that's a changing, and I think that's the backdrop. There are billions of dollars being poured into the R&D and the product development in this space right now. It is frenetic and crazy, and we're seeing products come to life very quickly. We don't have a national strategy right now. I don't know that we'll have one. We hope that there is one, but for infrastructure planning and the development of those industries in clusters, it's not happening by any big picture strategy. It's really down to states and maybe cities and regions. And so there's a handful of places, we'll talk about that in a few moments, that have sort of gotten ahead of this. In terms of the ecosystem, the technologies and the subsectors that are driving mobility, which is, let's say, tomorrow's automotive industry, it's really all about technology. So the commodity component manufacturing and assembly that has driven an auto plant, and where an auto plant goes, may still be to some extent relatively similar to what it is today. But we think that will evolve, and there will be niches in the technology space that are developing right now around the world, and even in the United States, around the unique technologies that are driving what is the automobile or the truck. So that's optics and sensors, so camera systems and sensors that are sort of guiding the vehicle and making sure it doesn't bump into things, to computational processing. So that's the Intel reference, or companies like MVEDA or Qualcomm. These are companies that a large part of their future is essentially focused on the data, on the computational processing. A lot of data coming in and out of the vehicle, and the need for essentially an onboard computers is at a much higher sort of requirement than ever before. So Intel really wasn't in the space 4 or 5 years ago at all, practically. And now they're a big player because they bought several companies and have integrated them into their forward thinking of the automotive industry. Cybersecurity is a big part of this, because the vehicles are moving around and they're communicating with each other and with the infrastructure system that they're operating on. And none of this will be successful unless the security of that data is maintained. And there's a lot of work going on right now to assure that's the case. And that data is transferred over our telecommunication systems. And so working with a whole set of companies that are really focused on this as the future of their industry. The data transmission and the secure data transmission in that regard. We talk about trucks and truck platooning. That means trucks moving in tandem together along the highway. Maybe essentially a train of trucks, 6 or 10 or 15 trucks, that without being joined together physically are moving down the highway and sharing efficiencies. Sometimes potentially even sharing drivers. So that's happening. It's a real thing today, and it will become a very large part of the trucking industry in the future. I mentioned, the propulsion systems, battery and energy storage is a whole set of technologies that the automotive companies like Tesla are involved in directly, but really it's third parties that are developing that technology, LG Chemical, Panasonic, and many others that are really driving the clean energy portion of this, at least on the electric side. If we sort of flip the coin, the future is really going to be either hydrogen or electric. And so we're working with companies that are developing hydrogen technology and taking that technology and putting it into trucks and buses. And that technology is at earlier stage than the electric and the battery, but it is moving along quite rapidly. In fact, a number of companies have come to Wall Street and received many billions of dollars of investment because the industry's banking on heavy trucks and buses and other equipment being powered by hydrogen in a much more significant way than it is today. And I guess lastly,
Adam, I don't mean to interrupt, but I see Lois was able to jump on, so I just wanted to.
I just did. Thank you.
And if you wanted Adam to give an introduction for her, that'd be great too. So thank you.
So everyone, Davin introduced us, and I'm Adam Wasserman, the managing partner of GLD Partners, and Lois Yates leads our work around mobility and competitiveness, and she and I will be talking to you today now that she's joined. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Adam. It's great to be here.
So lastly on this slide, so there's all these technologies that are driving the ecosystem that is mobility. But we don't, the last bullet is really not about a technology, but it's about an influence that is very significant. China is now the largest automotive market in the world. 10 years ago, it wasn't. 20 years ago, it was not at all. But today it is. And so as the largest market in the world, most of the manufacturers that manufacture cars and trucks and so forth are in China to attack that market. But what we're seeing is tremendous growth in the market from Chinese companies or joint ventures. And so we're going to see China playing a much more significant role in the world sector, the global sector, but particularly in the US. So we're working with several Chinese companies that are undertaking a large part of their R&D in Silicon Valley, or maybe in Detroit, because it's where the talent is. And frankly, it's where the money is as well, as they're raising money. And we know from our work with them and our work with them in China, they're going to be selling vehicles in the US. You can't buy one today. There are a few Chinese-made vehicles under Buick's name and so forth, but talking about a Chinese nameplate that's sold in the US as a Chinese vehicle. They will be sold in the US. Those supply chains to support those industries will be coming through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. They're going to be going to distribution centers and repair shops and so forth in the US. None of that exists today. We also know that they're going to be then making vehicles in the US probably 3, 4, 5 years after that. That's the plan. We think there's an opportunity for in this ecosystem as that emerges as well. So Lois, I'll get this started, and why don't you start to join?
Okay.
The auto industry has historically been centered in North America, certainly in the US and in Southeast Michigan, in Detroit. And then the industry grew into the Ohio Valley and then into the South and then now into Mexico. So they're chasing lower costs. And it was really about commodity production of parts and componentry That's different than what exists today. The industry, as I said earlier, is really almost all about technology. And it's about technologies that the legacy manufacturers have not really been all that good at. And so the industry has gravitated to Silicon Valley. And by many measures, the Silicon Valley is really the auto capital of the world today. It's certainly in the innovation center. And so that's now a major factor in the mobility space in the globe around the world, but certainly in the US. And what we have on the map here are a bunch of circles. So you have Michigan and you have Silicon Valley, and then you have some other hubs that are starting to emerge in one way or the other. In Ohio, it's in Columbus because they have a major test complex, and it's where the Honda plant is, and a whole host of suppliers and technology companies have clustered there. And then some other hubs in Texas and in Pittsburgh, because that's where Uber sort of took the technology that they're developing around the automated vehicle. Salt Lake City's trying its best to get started. In Nevada, they located initially Tesla's battery plants, but now a number of other projects. In the Northwest and in Los Angeles, I think the message here is that the Western US is emerging as this technology and automotive industry mobility hub. It's partly due to its sort of westward facing focus, seaport facing Asia. It's partly because of proximity to Silicon Valley. And otherwise it's land and its technology orientation and its friendly governments. So in our work with the state of New Mexico, all of that was really built around the question, if New Mexico did everything right, whatever that means, what could it attain in terms of growth in the mobility sector? And taking advantage of its east-west connections, its relative proximity to the West Coast, its north-south intersection between the Mexican supply chains, and its highway and rail intersections, corridors, in the north of the state and the south of the state. Lois, you want to add anything to that?
Well, Adam, I'm just thinking about, 2 years ago when I was back in Lansing, Michigan, and I was testifying in front of a Michigan legislative committee, and I was talking about this new ecosystem of auto industry that was developing in the West Coast, and they about booed me out of the room. So I think they've changed their mind now as they are actively courting these companies in California to come to Michigan.
One thing to point out, we happen to sit in Arizona. That's where our office is. But as we work in New Mexico, the neighboring state to this state, we've done a lot of work in California, certainly around Silicon Valley, with a lot of technology companies and OEMs on testing facilities and so forth. Arizona sits in the middle, and Arizona has won a series of major projects in this space. And I have to tell you, we know the players that they're not doing it with a lot of strategy. They're doing it because companies have sort of moved one step to the right and have looked for, inexpensive land and good supply chains and a friendly government. And I think it comes back to that story of the Western US states and the opportunity. I think we'll talk a little bit about it, but what we've propositioned to the state and then communities within the state is if you did get a handful of things on the regulatory side and infrastructure and otherwise, New Mexico might be able to win some of this investment going forward.
Adam, as you had just said that, there are a lot of states that aren't looking at the economic development opportunities, but there are about 40 plus states that have enacted some kind of legislation or executive order to deal with the autonomous auto industry or vehicle industry. And unfortunately, New Mexico is one of those states that has not done anything yet. So there remain about 6 or 8 states that still aren't active. But to your point, so many states are just looking at it through a DOT lens. They're not looking at it through an economic development lens. And that's why we see this really unique opportunity for New Mexico to develop it from the economic development side and obviously incorporate everything that has to be incorporated from DOT, but it makes for such a bigger, stronger story. And we know for a fact that states that get it, that understand it, and that adopt regulatory and other issues are states that companies want to go to. These companies want to feel like they are wanted by states and that states understand this technology change that the whole world is going through now and how they can take advantage of it. So it's critically important that New Mexico develop a strong business environment for this industry. And so we're talking about regulatory, which I just mentioned. We're talking about testing and development, because contrary to normal propulsion systems that we've had in the electric cars that we now see and the hydrogen cars that we now see, this part of the industry, the autonomous part of the industry, is still very much in the testing and development stage. Has not gotten to the point where cars are on the highway totally autonomous. So testing and development, if we can offer these companies an environment to test and develop their new technology in, that's very, very attractive to them. And the infrastructure, it's critically important to have the telecommunications infrastructure in place that will support this industry, because the connectivity of data is the key to everything that we're talking about. And then to have the expertise and to have incentives available for this industry to be able to thrive. Now, I think it's important to mention that this industry is not asking for a handout. This industry is willing to pay its way. If you have a testing development site that you've done for them, they're willing to pay to use it. So it's not like people coming to the table and having to put this big group of incentives on the table in order to get them to consider you. That's just not the case with this industry. So when we looked at the New Mexico mobility strategy, we looked at, first of all, we looked at how competitive is New Mexico at this point in time for this industry. And I know that y'all are sitting, not been any auto industry in New Mexico historically, but yet when you look at the competitiveness of the state in terms of the incentives that you offer, in terms of tax structure and things of that sort, the business environment that you offer, you're very competitive. When you also take a look at the laboratories that have been in your state for many, many years, many of the foundational technologies that are a part of autonomous cars have come out of those laboratories. So there's the expertise in New Mexico as well as the foundation for the technologies that are being used. And also some of these technologies, and I'm sure Adam probably mentioned this already, are being used in the aerospace industry too. There's cross culture in between those two industries. So regulatory adjustments have to be taken a look at. Testing and development infrastructure should be put in place, and there should be designated corridors, and we think there should be mobility investment zones. So that's what our investment strategy for New Mexico is based upon. Adam?
Thank you, Brian, for the nudge or the hint. One example. There's a company that is located, it's headquartered in Phoenix, called Nikola. And Nikola's had its ups and downs in its first couple of years, but essentially it's a hydrogen and electric truck manufacturer, manufacturing heavy trucks. And they were born in someone's basement in Utah, in Salt Lake City. And this fellow went to the state of Utah and said, I want to build a plant here. And they honestly didn't take him seriously. They didn't understand the sector. They didn't understand how to sort of reach out and provide value to this company. Sort of ignored him. And so he called the next state, literally. Around him, he called Arizona, and the state received him at the airport, understood the technology, didn't really have a strategy, frankly, but they're building now a $1 billion manufacturing plant in between Phoenix and Tucson. That project could be in New Mexico somewhere, and certainly some of the supply chain components could be for companies like that, for sure. So we set about to take this competitiveness work that Lois discussed and said, well, you know, in a realistic sense, state communities did everything right. How well positioned is the industry? How much could be won, and what kind of structure would you create to kind of deliver on that? And we as Lois described, we think there are some fundamentals, maybe not to win the big auto plants, maybe, but maybe not. The value is really in the technology, and it's going to be in smaller manufacturing, production, and assembly, and supply chains to support that. We think there really is an opportunity, especially when you think about the interaction between, New Mexico and the positioning, certainly in your neck of the woods, around the border crossings and the connection and access to not only Juarez, but the gut of the automotive and technology industry in Mexico, which is even further south, central Mexico. So we think there's a proposition, but what's the structure that would sort of deliver on that? So we said to the state, and we're saying to you, no other state really has wrapped their arms around this. They've thought about it from a regulatory perspective, what you can't do. They thought about it from DOT's perspective a little bit, but it's really how to tell the industry, if you want to do something in our state, this is what you'd have to do, permitting sorts of orientation. We said, well, what if we took policy and permitting and regulatory and positioned it so it's providing a safe platform for development of the industry in the state, but in a thoughtful way, it's integrating infrastructure and a variety of specialized products around the entire state. So the state of New Mexico goes to the industry and says, we are a laboratory, border to border, boundary to boundary. We've got various products within our state that we know you need. And our company knows, for example, something about the testing and development infrastructure these companies need. We developed a facility outside of Silicon Valley a couple of years ago, and our first deal was with Google and their automated car division called Waymo. And they initially wanted 5 acres to do some testing, and we ended up building 120 acres, which is their global sort of test track, if you will, for their automotive work. And around that, we built more infrastructure, very specialized infrastructure, not all that expensive. It costs something to build, but we have now dozens of companies, OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, technology companies like Samsung and Intel, companies that are these Chinese manufacturers, upstarts that are now multi-billion-dollar startups. And so that's a playground for them near Silicon Valley. So it's kind of easy, to be honest with you. But we think this Western States proposition is quite real, because there are very few of those testing facilities anywhere in the United States. And so our thought was this, that we established 3 hubs, Albuquerque, Las Cruces region, and Gallup, taking advantage of 2 interstate highway corridors. So we'll see highway testing happening on the I-40 and on the I-10 corridor. The north and the south have access to various states, so same day testing in 2 different states we know is very valuable to them. But then in these hubs, we have a small, a medium, and a large-sized urban region with specialized infrastructure focusing on different parts of the industry. And the main draws were that it's a statewide proposition, so the same company could do various sorts of testing in different sorts of environments, weather, physical infrastructure, urban settings, and so forth. Pretty low cost, not the lowest cost, but a pretty low cost environment generally to operate in. Proposition would be with government partners that get it, understand it, and are developing sort of ways to support the industry as a partner. And then specialized infrastructure and a regulatory environment that, as we've said earlier, is designed to support the industry. So, we think there's an on-road testing story, which is on the interstate highways. And we're propositioning the state right now that they designate certain corridors, and there's special propositions for the industry in terms of permitting and regulatory and liability and so forth requirements. So a state that's out in front and says, our interstate highways, we want you to be safe, and here's what you're going to have to do to make sure that you're safe, but we really want you to test here, and here's some infrastructure where we're willing to throw into the story to support you. But it's not just on the public road. They're going to need to be testing, high-speed testing, other sorts of testing in a private setting or in a setting that is not on the public road. Is we're propositioning a couple of different test environments in the north and we hope in the south, in your area. And so that's the proposition we've offered. We've actually been asked to present that to the State Transportation Commission about a week or two ago, and they were quite excited and essentially said, whatever you need. And Lois, I guess right now they're starting to think about the regulatory.
Yes, yeah. In fact, this week I'm going to be on a phone call with a bill writer from the legislature and a couple of people from DOT talking about what regulatory initiatives they think should be put into it. Incidentally, the state, when I said that the state hadn't done anything, that is true. But at the same time, about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, there was a memorial that was passed that asked DOT to put together an advisory committee within DOT to take a look at the autonomous vehicle industry, which they did. And they came up with some very, very good ideas. We were really quite impressed with what they had come up with. There is a history in the department. There are a couple of people that are really knowledgeable about this industry, and they're going to be part of a phone call tomorrow to talk about possible regulatory legislation.
So Lois, I think we probably need to speed up. We only have a handful of slides left, but to speed it up for David. In the end, and Lois, you'll talk more about this, but the opportunity we would say in southern New Mexico is to be part of that laboratory, participate with the state, and the yield is really about economic development opportunity. So we think companies will locate facilities, they'll come do testing. The ultimate objective is to get them to do engineering and product development and manufacturing in the region, and that's jobs and that's investment, and we think government revenues as the result of that. That's the point of this.
And Adam, I think that's exactly what you just said. This slide just reiterates what we've just said, that you start with the testing and development and the certification, the research side of it, then you can move into engineering and product development, and then you can move into assembly and production. And that's what we think southern New Mexico can offer the industry.
Now, what the state is doing is sort of setting the framework right now. It's a work in progress, but it's actually starting. The wheels are moving. About
Right.
The big picture, about the regulatory system, ultimately incentives and the corridors. What might happen in southern New Mexico largely is on the region. The state's probably going to be helpful, but it's probably going to need to come from the region. So a couple of specific slides about our thoughts about your region for you all to sort of pick up and think about on your own. We think there's a testing proposition, and that's companies that are that they're making cars, that are working on the LiDAR, essentially the sensor and camera systems, that are working on advanced connected vehicle technologies and so forth. That's for vehicles, passenger cars, that's for trucks. And we think that's also for cargo handling. So, that's about trucks moving cargo from warehouse to warehouse. That's about trucks moving cargo from intermodal facility to warehouse. And the whole idea of testing and providing companies a setting to do that, that's purpose-built for them, will be very attractive. Companies will come to New Mexico to use your infrastructure with you. From there, we have the opportunity to create that platform that they will do other things in the future. We think that cargo handling proposition integrates very well with what your region is, or at least part of your region is, as a logistics hub. So the whole Santa Teresa proposition around north and south, supply chains meeting, and then cargo transportation moving east and west on the railroad and on the highway. You've got the infrastructure, you've got the proposition with the connectivity to Mexico, and you've won a lot of business on the warehousing side at the border. You, with state help, have moved an intermodal facility from Texas to New Mexico. The raw proposition is there for something that's even larger around an inland port that is automated. And then that would be a very special proposition for large shippers that are thinking this place gets it, they understand it, and they're helping to construct a proposition for me that is about efficiency, not just about location. And we know we're working on a project in California like that with the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, that we could suspect that you would be a kind of an eastern anchor for the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and this really interesting fulcrum into Mexico supply chains, but also onward on via a very efficient hub. In fact, we would sort of say that that would be designed from the ground up as the most efficient logistics setting in the country because of its use of automation and clean energy propositions. Companies like Amazon or many large shippers are going to be very attracted to that from its fundamental location, but then the automation component, which sort of drives efficiencies and lowers costs. And lastly, on the urban testing side, so companies that are not testing high speed and on the highway and for closed course testing, but really want to test on public roads, and that could be, in a downtown Las Cruces setting. It could be university to downtown or university specific. But there are a lot of companies that are building very specialized products that are starting to test in real world settings and want public partners to do that. And so there's a set of opportunities we think is there. So really, to reiterate what we've just said, if we looked at your region from our perspective, we would throw to you all, Las Cruces and the metro region could be a hub for urban testing and development on the public roadways and in a closed course setting. And that the interstate highway connections north and west create this proposition where, as we have with Daimler trucks in Albuquerque, where they're running from Albuquerque to Amarillo on the I-40 corridor, we could see significant amounts of testing and development and the engineering that goes along with that on the I-10 corridor and then between Albuquerque and Las Cruces. And separately, but part of a kind of a regional approach, our thought is, as we said earlier, building on what Santa Teresa is, this logistics and manufacturing zone, this inland port that is built and gains notoriety for being sort of this national model for an international crossing, but also a major logistics and investment hub. And lastly, the highway testing corridor, you can run in and out of your state into Texas and back. We have companies that would give their eye teeth to be able to run to 2 states in a day and make sure they're sort of respecting and understanding the regulatory environments in various jurisdictions. Lois?
So just summing it up real quickly for y'all, we think you have 3 really big opportunities for mobility enabled opportunities. I've used the word opportunities twice. We think you can become a recognized mobility testing research center, talking about the urban testing that Adam just talked about, closed course development, high-speed testing on your highways, and the development and production that could go along with that. And then, you have, with your intermodal facility, you have an asset that's coveted all across the country. I can't tell you how many people we talk to, how many communities that would just love to have that. So you could establish this region as a national model for cargo management efficiency through all these new automated systems that are going to go into warehouses, that are going to go into the intermodal, that are going to go into the trucks, the buses, the cars, and give you an opportunity to become a national center and get the recognition that you deserve for that. Adam.
That, Devin, wraps up our discussion. We'd be happy to talk to y'all or answer questions.
Yeah, Adam and Lois, thank you very much for that. Before we move to questions, I see Fernando Macias, the county manager, is on the line. I've been in dialogues with Fernando and all of us together on this for a little while. Fernando, is there anything you'd like to add from your perspective as county manager in terms of a strategy like this?
And Davin, are you able to hear me? Have I come on?
Yes, yes, I can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I just wanted, I think from a county perspective, and we have been working with MVEDA and others related to the study that was originally undertaken by Adam and Lois. We have a very strong interest in terms of pursuing a relationship with Adam and Lois in terms of pushing the concept forward here in this area to look at the different options where might be strongest and to see if we can't take further steps, positive steps that would lead us to expand the options here locally. I mean, we haven't sat down to have those specific discussions, so I'm not able to give any greater specificity. But obviously, we believe that this area has a lot that can contribute to those companies that are interested in developing this technology. And we're very interested in terms of what next steps we can undertake or support to show some concrete movement in this area. I certainly can indicate that at this point without having an opportunity. Davin and I did have an opportunity to talk to Lois and Adam with other individuals, and we have indicated the county's certainly strong interest to see if we can go forward with a relationship that would materialize some opportunities here locally.
I appreciate that, Fernando. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'd ask if whoever's going to ask a question, turn your camera on so we can see you or recognize you for that. But while you're doing that, let me start off with a question, Adam and Lois. One of the things or assets I feel we have in the region that could complement this industry is the fact that we do have a rich history through NMSU and physical science laboratories specifically of working with the autonomous air vehicles over the years. How would you feel that expertise translates for the attraction and growth of the automated ground vehicle market per se?
That's a great question. And we had a chance to speak with some of those folks as well as some of the other laboratories in the state. Lois, do you want to pick up on that?
Well, yeah, I'll start. Yeah, we were really impressed with the people that we met, and some of those people have come out of Sandia, so it goes back to what I talked about, some of that similar technology. We've been doing some work with the Air Force Research Lab in Albuquerque, and they're into the commercial satellites. They're not as much into drones, but the similarities in the technology between the two industry sectors is quite strong. Obviously, they're applied a little differently, but the whole issue of cybersecurity and all the things that go into that are just very, very similar. So Davin, to your question, I think we see a lot of related aspects between those two industries.
Davin, we've had companies come to us and say, our technology is applied on the ground on some sort of wheeled, contraption, but we would love to figure out how to, number one, sell to the government, or number two, apply it in the air. And it's for these companies I'm referring to, it's a second priority, but the table's not been set for them to engage. And so Lois's reference to AFRL in Albuquerque, AFRL, the Air Force Research Lab, has said to us, we'd like to build a facility in a testing complex where we can engage with, for example, they've talked to us about Silicon Valley. If we could engage with small and medium-sized companies in Silicon Valley and attract them to work with us, we'd like to do that. But we're pretty sure, I mean, everybody we talk to in New Mexico, as you would expect, really does talk about the laboratories. In this case, it's about applying it in a very specific manner around what the laboratories and the government needs, and that they've coached us out of Sandia and AFRL, Los Alamos a little bit, of what their mission is and how to apply what this could be to support their mission. And that as you're probably quite schooled at that, there's opportunities there, but I think we'd like to bring the industry to the table in a very specific proposition.
And let me expand on that just a little bit. Maybe I can bring, I see Lenny Martinez is on the call. Lenny, I don't mean to put you on the hot seat here, but you've had a chance to speak with Adam and Lois as well, and kind of think about this from NMSU's perspective. And of course, you're a Sandia man by background as well, so you may have a lot more to say on this subject matter than just that. But anyway, what is your feeling about the integration that NMSU brings to help enhance this industry here in southern New Mexico?
Well, this is it's really interesting because I think that that both Adam and Lois have pointed to a couple of assets that are here that are unique in terms of this world of logistics and distribution. The intermodal is I mean, that's a huge investment, and it's bringing the West Coast literally to Santa Teresa, and then from there you can see how from a logistics standpoint things begin to branch out. But from an infrastructure standpoint, we've been looking at things like electric vehicles and how it is that we can do testing for fleets, for big trucks, and what that would mean in terms of trying to attract people, not only to do their testing here if we could put the infrastructure in place, but then also the offshoot of that, what happens when those things need to get built and how, where you go from there. So, we've been poking at these ideas and trying to grow ourselves in a way to say, hey, listen, let's take the assets that we have here and let's bring them together in such a way that we create a critical mass. So these are pretty exciting concepts for us. We're pretty excited about the thought of being a research and test center because of the tremendous test capabilities that we have immediately around us and throughout the state.
Thank you, Lenny. Let me open it up to other questions if anyone has them. It's always so. Hey, Eric.
Thank you, Devin. Adam, good to see you again. Real quick question, as it relates to educational tracks and certifications and focus of workforce, what does New Mexico need to do or need to focus on in the next 10 years to grow a logistics strength when it comes to our workforce?
Good question. And Lois is our expert on that. So we'll answer that maybe, Lois, from a perspective of logistics and technology and the combination, what we've seen in other places. But Lois is sort of a labor force a guru. So go ahead.
Well, the one thing that I will say is, as we think about automation and just specifically the truck industry, as we think about the autonomous trucks, people get worried about truck drivers are going to be laid off and what's going to happen to all those truck drivers that, they're going to lose their jobs. And I think that the thing that we need to look at is that through especially our community colleges, that's where it starts, where the skill sets can be honed and can be improved. And I think you'll see new jobs being created within the industry in autonomy. And as we look at the material handling industry, we look at how things are going to change in warehouses and how things are going to change in the yards. Once again, there's going to be different levels of jobs that will be created, and the community colleges will be really critical to begin that educational process to get people retrained and to get younger people trained in these industry sectors. And as we did our study for New Mexico, I looked at the community college programs, and I looked at the programs in what we consider to be the competing states of California, Arizona, Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And I looked at what they were doing, and New Mexico has an opportunity to build on what's already in place and to build those skill sets that were going to be needed for the industry. And obviously the universities are already producing people that will be able to function in this industry. So I think that with a concentration by the education system on this opportunity, I think New Mexico could be very competitive and can produce the labor force that's needed to make it work.
Just Eric, add one thing to that. In our practical work with these companies, it's really, as Lois said, it's a spectrum, and it's the smartest folks with the fanciest degrees on one end. I mean, really sophisticated folks in their training, PhD scientists, to folks that are essentially on-the-job trained technicians. We have watched people participate in the testing and development side of things that have no background in the sector at all. They're just really smart people. And so it's been fascinating for us to watch the amalgam of skill sets and people that have been attracted to this industry. The other thing I'll add is they're from all over the world. Absolutely. I mean, the world's coming to work in this sector, this spectrum of in the United States. When we built the facility in California, I said it's near Silicon Valley. It's near Silicon Valley, but it's not in Silicon Valley. There's you know Tesla. There's a company called NIO that's called the Tesla of China, and we're working with them in Silicon Valley. They have 700 researchers, and they're dying to sort of to have testing facilities in various parts of the United States for their product. And we sat and met with them, and their young tech staff said to us, well, you know, that's the Central Valley. That's on the other side of the mountains. We would never go there. Well, they did, and they're flourishing. And in fact, what they're doing and Google's doing and others is now they're hiring from the local community college and the local university. And nobody expected that would occur. So it's a spectrum. It is.
Adam, just to add to that too, I mean, we were just constantly amazed at Waymo, and the executive in charge of the entire testing program from Waymo has a fine arts degree, just a bachelor's fine arts degree. And it's a woman, and she's the executive in charge of their entire testing program. So it takes a lot of skill sets to be successful in this.
Thanks for that question, Eric. Anybody else have some curiosities or questions regarding this industry?
Yeah, Devin, this is Rico Gonzalez. Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Thank you. Devin, I was wondering if our guests would comment on what the electric utilities that have served in these areas, if they've been a part of any of the testing, or where they envision the place for the utilities in these areas. And I'll leave my question there. Thank you.
Great question.
I'll start by saying we've been doing work in Utah, and most in the last legislative session, or maybe it was 2 years ago, but the Utah legislature granted the utility in Utah $50 million to put charging stations in across the state to prepare the state for electric cars. That's not the testing part of it, but that's anticipating what the future is going to be for the state.
So in terms of New Mexico, I think we don't know. We had an advisory committee set up, and utilities were tangentially involved and we interacted with them. We also should say that there's a significant telecommunications element to this as well. And I sort of touched on that without a lot of art earlier about the connected vehicle. And Devin, if it's okay, I'll introduce John Nals. John, are you on the line? So John is an executive with a company called Zayo, and they're a big fiber. They own a lot of fiber networks in the United States and Europe and other places. And we've been sort of interacting with Zayo around their vision for the connected vehicle and the infrastructure that's necessary to support that. And actually, we met Zayo in Santa Fe at a session 3 or 4 years ago with the legislature. But John, can you mind giving your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate the intro, and pleased to be here and listen in. It's always instructive for us to see what's going on in these various localities. Just to give a little bit of background, Zayo is a fairly large bandwidth provider that provides connectivity to major corporations. Think the large web scale companies, the large wireless companies. And one of the things that we recognized is there was a gap along these corridors that Adam has been speaking about to provide connectivity to support these innovations. All of these companies rely on data to make their business cases work. And so we're working hand in hand with Adam and Lois and many other parties to help facilitate and ensure that these pipes, these fiber optic networks are made available in the areas where the business is taking place. So, you know, Adam and I have been, and Lois have been speaking a lot about logistics corridors and these inland port type facilities that will help broaden and deepen the capabilities. The side benefit of all of this is that those backbone networks can be used for other infrastructure. Think the digital gap for e-learning for students at home. Wireless ISP connectivity, we provide a ton of capabilities into that. So we look at this at a multifaceted level.
John, there's others, but your network runs through New Mexico in a couple of different places, right?
Yes, we do. So we actually cross along the I-20 corridor. So south, you know, we transit from, call it the Dallas route all the way into LA. So a major corridor along that path. We also cross north and south through New Mexico, really transiting from Las Cruces area all the way up to Albuquerque and then on up into the Denver area. So we've got several major paths that crisscross through New Mexico.
So, Gavin, just one other thing. What John has brought up is this connectivity of these gaps. And so this is about meeting all of the needs of industry. So as the companies come to us and they say, we want to test our vehicle running from city to city. So maybe not the urban testing, but city to city, you know, it's all about their testing is about gathering data. As they drive this vehicle or it drives itself, it's gathering data. And that data is then uploaded back to headquarters of Michigan or Silicon Valley or Germany or Japan at the end of the night. And so a simplistic proposition is, what if we sort of provided them value along the route? In other words, we're building the infrastructure because we've got access to the fiber pipe that allows that makes that easier for that company to do their business, makes them more efficient. And so when we unveiled that conversation to Daimler, and by the way, Daimler Trucks owns 55 or 60% of the North American heavy truck market. So brands like Freightliner and others, that's the Daimler. They're big players, and they're testing their autonomous trucks in New Mexico, and they thought that was actually quite helpful. If we did more of that on a system-wide basis, that laboratory starts to kind of show itself.
Thank you. Well, and everybody, we're up against the hour here, so I know we're starting to lose some people who might have some other commitments, but John, thank you. Very nice meeting you. Love to learn more about your company and your network here in New Mexico. And Adam and Lois, as always, I mean, the wealth of information and learning curve that you help us expand on is just absolutely great. And we hope, we hope that New Mexico and especially Dona County, we continue this process of either learning more or actually taking deliberate steps to attract this industry, because I think we're all going to see this. We're all going to see the industry expand, and New Mexico definitely wants to be part of it. Before we end, however, I see that Jacob Slavic, who is our sponsor for today from NAI First Valley, is with us. And I definitely wanted to give him a chance just to be recognized and say a few words on behalf of MVEDA. Jacob is also one of our executive committee members here at MVEDA and support us in many different ways. So before I turn it over to Jacob, Adam, and Lois, once again, thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll be talking more in the next couple of weeks. And Jacob, thank you.
Yep, my apologies for being late there today, but I don't have much to say. I just want to thank everyone that was able to come today and participate in our virtual meeting. This is the way we're going to do it until we can meet in person once again. So thank you, and we're going to do this again in the coming months. So look for those invites. And Lois and Adam, thank you guys. That was a very fascinating presentation, and I hope that New Mexico can capitalize and get involved in this emerging industry. So thanks again, and that's all you have for me.
Thank you, Jacob. Well, everybody on the phone, I go back to where I started this conversation. I think one thing we've heard from our partners like you is they've missed the information exchange and economic development. I wanted to assure you that things have not stopped over the past 8-9 months from our side, as you can see with today's conversation. And we're all looking forward to moving our economy in the right direction. And this is just one part of it. So once again, thank you everybody for being here. Adam and Lois, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Davin.